Hey, welcome back. This is the lesson where all the fun begins because we're going to be accessing an actual JSON file.
This video is brought to you by Appy Academy.
And for the most part, for the previous lessons, we've just been working with the JavaScript objects that have been formatted as JSON. And it's not actually JSON files, but the idea is the same thing, where we would get the object information as JSON data, so as valid JSON data, and pull that information into our web application. So let's just make sure that we do have some valid JSON data. I'm going to use the object from the last lesson, validate it as JSON, and in fact it is valid JSON, so that's perfect because we can make a JSON file and pull that into our project. So creating a new file, go to New, and then we're going to just paste the JSON object in there, save, and save this as JSON, or we'll call it test JSON. So giving it the extension of JSON, JSON. And so now what we want to do is we want to use that data object and pull it into our project. And again, we do need to use the HTTP protocol. So make sure that whatever code you're rendering out in the browser that you are using a local machine. So if you're not using brackets, there's various options that you can run local machines on your computer, and you are going to need to use that in order to make use of fetch, because this runs over the HTTP protocol, and this is a way within JavaScript where we can access external file contents. And this file, even though it's sitting within our own directory, we want to access that file object. So we're using fetch, and then the path to where the file is located. So this is on the same directory. It's called test.json, and we're going to be returning back that fetch object. Fetch is promised based, so whenever it retrieves the file information, it's going to issue a response. And then using the arrow function, we can take the response and then return it back as JSON. And there's a number of options with fetch. It's a modern way to make the XHR requests over the network and returning it back as JSON, and this can return it back into a usable JavaScript object. So once we return it back as JSON, now it's going to be an actual JSON usable format object, and we can use the console log and see the contents of that JSON data. So going back into our application, we refresh, and like magic, we're pulling in the contents of the file. So if I went into the file and if I updated it, let's update the counter, and I refresh it, I've got the new value already present within the JSON object, because it's always retrieving back that information. So whenever I save it, it's actually refreshing the browser. That's why it's refreshing within the HTML file. And once we can pull it in, that means that we can make use of it. And because fetch is already converting it into a JavaScript object, we can right off the bat take JSON and we can use it right away, and we can extract the contents of it. So make sure that you are able to access your JSON file, that it is also proper JSON structure in order to access it properly. And using fetch, request the JSON file, output it into the console, and you can be ready to move on to the next lesson. We're going to look at some more complex objects and making use of them within our application. So that's still to come in the upcoming lessons.